Hey everyone, and welcome. It's Joe Brady here. We're going to have a little bit of fun today. Going to do a lot of stuff pertaining to color. So let's get started. And what we're here to talk about is getting great lab prints and some of the things that are involved as far as color goes and editing. And we're going to also go live into both Photoshop and Lightroom today. So today's session is sponsored by both X-Rite and Nations Photo Lab. And if you hang around to the end, they're both going to have special offers for you as well. So here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to start with monitor calibration and profiling. I'm not actually going to go through the process. I'm just going to kind of talk around it about 30,000 foot level. We'll give you links in our follow-up that go over the details if you want to see how everything works step by step. But other than that, no, I'm not going to go into that kind of detail. We're going to talk about color settings in Photoshop and how to get everything set up so it's going to be best for when you have your prints made. I'm going to go over the soft proofing process in both Photoshop and Lightroom and talk about color space conversions. And then what kind of things do you need to do to make sure that your lab is getting the best file, regardless of how you're going to have it printed. So how do you do this? What are the steps you need to take? Well, first of all, your monitor. Your monitor's got to be calibrated and profiled, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. Next, you've got to learn how to soft proof. Soft proofing is something that takes place in both Photoshop and Lightroom, and I'll show you how and where to do that, and we'll talk about setting up Photoshop's colors. I'm also going to give you some warnings about some misinformation that's out there. Someone asked, oh, hey, Chris Orwig is with us, so honored to have you with us. Chris asked, what monitors do I recommend? Now, the monitor recommendations I could give you would be personal ones. I am a big fan of the Azo monitors. They are kind of the Rolls-Royce of monitors. But generally figure you're going to have to spend, $700, $750 to get a really good graphics monitor. All right, so we get this monitor, whatever monitor you have. Whether you've got an Azo or anything in the entire continuum of monitors available, you've got to have your monitor calibrated and profiled. And these two things are part of the same process, but they mean different things. What calibration is, you're setting your standard settings. It's getting the brightness or luminance under control. You're dealing with the color temperature and the gamma or the contrast setting. Now, here's something that's a little bit of a debate. Actually, there is no debate, but let's just go over it again. There are some people out there, I won't mention any names, that are actually suggesting that you should set your monitor color temperature to 5000K. This is a bad idea. Bad. Monitors have a default color temperature around 6500K. That's where you want to be. The confusion is because you're looking at prints under a standard light that is 5000K. However, and there's lots of technical reasons for it we're not going to delve into today, but for some reason, a print looked under 5000K lights matches an image on a monitor at 6500K. So a good monitor calibrated to 6500K is going to match. So really there's really no debate here. Here's the summary. No 5000K. Just say no to it. If somebody recommends it, they're wrong. It's not even up for debate. They're wrong. What you want is 6500K. Yes. Okay, to summarize, no 5000K, bad. Yes, 6500K. That's it. That's a simple one. Let's continue on. So, do you need hardware and software to do this? Yes, you do. And why? Because your eyes are too easily influenced, and your ability to judge color varies depending on what kind of state you're in. Have you had too many Red Bulls? Did you not get enough sleep, etc.? I'm going to show you a couple of examples that show you that. Oh, a couple of people are asking specifically about the Mac monitors, about the new 27-inch Thunderbolt, the iMac monitors. Can they be calibrated? Are they good monitors? Yes, they can be calibrated. Yes, they're good monitors. Downside, they're sRGB displays. That's the limit of their color space. For going out to a lab, not an issue. However, if you're doing your own inkjet printing or going elsewhere, might be an issue. So we'll get into that when we get into Photoshop. So let's take some examples of why you need some hardware and software to get your monitor under control. You guys may have seen this before. I've shown it before. I never get tired of seeing this graphic. I love it. You can download this from online. Just search on this guy's name, Edward Adelson, and you can download this image and prove it to yourself. Now you see this little checkerboard thing here. We've got the squares A and B. Well, what's amazing is they are exactly the same shade of gray, but because of the surrounding colors, your eyes are fooled. So what I did was I brought this image into Photoshop. I got the eyedropper and I sampled it, and they were the same. So to show that, I just created a couple of bars to put next to it, and you can see when I overlay the bars, now they look the same because they're surrounded by the same color. Take the bars away, and what's really funny, if you look at it, it's like the B, as you stare at it, starts to lighten up even though nothing's going on. Let's do that one more time. So stare at the square labeled B, which is looking now the same as A. Pull the bars away, and it's almost like it starts to lighten up on its own. So it's just something that your eyes do. Same thing can happen with color. Here we got these blue stripes. The ones on the left obviously appear lighter than the ones on the right. You can guess what's going to happen. I just pull away the black bars, and all of a sudden you can see they are actually exactly the same shade of blue. So you really need devices to get this under control. And that's what we're going to talk about. Oh, and a couple of other things. A couple of you asked, if you join me later, have to leave early, then no worries. This is being recorded. Just give us 24 hours or so. Could be a little longer, so we're supposed to get a really big snowstorm tonight, but we'll send you an email as soon as it is ready for viewing. So if you're sending out your files to a lab for all your printing, then you need something on getting your monitor profiled and calibrated. And these devices will take care of all the questions. You're not going to have to set the gamma. You're not going to have to set the luminance. It's going to do it for you. So here's why you need to do this, and I'm sure this happens to some of you. The most common thing I hear from my friends, particularly wedding photographers, for some reason, their prints come back dark. Well, that's because the monitor's set wrong. Or there's a color shift. Well, that's because the monitor's set wrong. Or some colors are good, but others are awful. That's usually something else. So what is going on? Well, stop and think about it for a second. Your monitor is the single most important thing in your workflow, because if you're doing your own editing, you're making your decisions based on what you see on your screen. If your screen's wrong, then what ends up happening is you're making decisions based on a false starting point, and your corrections and all the stuff you're going to do is really just going to be a waste of time. Let's take a look at some common things that happen, and this is what causes some of the trouble. So you've got an image on your monitor and you're looking at it, and it looks a little bit blue. So what do? You go into Photoshop or Lightroom, you do a color correction, add some yellow back into it, and great, now it looks good. But then you send that out and your print comes back yellow. Why? Well, it's your monitor was set to blue, as that frequently happens, because bright blue monitors make games look good, make movies look good, and make the internet look good, but they're not good for photography. So what ends up happening is you corrected for something that was already okay, but your monitor was set a little too blue. The other common thing is monitor brightness is too high, and here you can see it on iMac, and they do default to pretty high brightness. So again, you're going to go into your software and make a correction. So I go in and I create a layer to bring that brightness down. Now it looks great on my monitor. I send it out to be printed, and what happens? I get a print back that is dark. Again, why? Well, the file was fine. It was the monitor that was too bright. We adjusted to the monitor rather than was actually in the file. And that's why you need to have your monitor calibrated, because you don't want yellow prints. You don't want dark prints. You just want to get a perfect print when you go send out to your lab or you print on your own device. Someone asked if you're only working with labs, are sRGB monitors good enough? And the answer is yes, sure, because that's the color space they're going to work with. Okay, so here's two solutions. Now, I mentioned this before, and again, if you joined us late, I'm not going to go into demonstrations of the devices. I'm just going to give you highlights of them. If you're interested in that, when we do our follow-up, we'll give you links to programs that go over these in detail step by step. But my two favorite ones for really easy and simple are the ColorMonkey display on the left, the iWin Display Pro on the right. Gee, they look kind of similar. Yeah, same hardware basically. What's going on is the software they use is very different, and it comes down to how much detail do you want to get into when you're doing your calibration. If you just want it to calibrate and just plug it in and leave it alone and just Do your thing, and when you're done, well, everything will be happy. Get a Color Monkey display. Very simple to use and very powerful. It's a great device. If you're in a data and you want to take it another step, you want to see not only how good is your monitor, but how good is your monitor from corner to corner, how is it different from the middle to the bottom. It will tell you kinds of things like that. It will trend your monitor over time. It will allow you to do bigger patch sets to get even a slightly more accurate color display profile. If you're into that, then the i1 Display Pro. Now, one of the things that both of these devices have added is something called ADC, and this is what makes them really easy to use. Basically, they take control. As long as it's a monitor that recognizes this ADC thing, it will automatically take control of the gamma, the contrast setting, your luminance setting, everything, and you just say start and off it goes. It will calibrate your monitor and do everything for you without you having to make any adjustments on the monitor. You do not need to set your monitor to anything first. It will take control and put everything in the right place. They also do two other things. If you're in an environment where the light is changing a lot, then what you can do is have this automatic light smart control set. And what you do is you leave the device plugged in, the software runs in the background, and if the ambient light around the monitor changes too much, it will adjust the brightness of the display for you. Also, flare correct. If you have a monitor that has a very glossy screen, what it allows you to do is to take a reading off of that screen, and it will figure out how much the ambient light is reflecting back and causing a little bit. Really what ends up happening is you end up with a loss of contrast. So if that's the case, it will boost the contrast a little bit for you again automatically. Again, as I mentioned, we'll send you more details. I'm not going to do any more demo of the devices about this. We'll send you a link that goes over each of these in detail. It'll cover everything you can think of. Todd asked about lighting around the monitors. Actually, let me address that because that's a good point. You don't want to have a window light shining on your monitor. Your monitor the light should be behind you. If you've got lighting issues or overhead lights that are a problem, then I highly recommend get yourself a monitor hood. You want to make sure that the light hitting the monitor is much dimmer than the light coming off of the monitor. And if you do that, you're going to have a much more accurate display. But that's a good question, Todd. Thanks for that. So let's continue on. Okay, so our monitor is calibrated and profiled. Again, we'll send you links to webinars that go over that step by step. But we have a lot to cover in software and not that much time, so let's get this done. First of all, we're going to go over the color settings in software because there are some things that you need to know about, and there's some debate there, and I'll give you my recommendations. Also, Lightroom does things differently. Lightroom now has soft proofing, but the color management happens on export, so we're going to go live into both of those programs and go over the process for each one. So we're going to first go into Photoshop. We're going to adjust an image there. We're going to see how to soft proof. But first, let's just jump into Photoshop first. And I've got an image ready for you. And the first thing we're going to do is take a look at color settings. So if you go under Edit and come on down, and this has been here for years, so if you don't have the latest Photoshop, I think this is the same all the way back to CS2. So you click on Color Settings, and eventually we should get our menu. Where did it go? There it comes. Okay, little delay there. So let me just go to the Adobe RGB defaults. This is how it, actually that's not how it ships. North American General Purpose 2. If you've never gone here, this is where Photoshop defaults to. And you've got working space and color management policies. So let's go over these. First of all, working space. If your entire life revolves around sending out your images to a lab, then the North American settings are probably a good place to be. Me personally, I would not recommend that because I work in 16-bit Pro Photo on my images until I'm ready to send them out. So I don't want to go deal with sRGB until that point. I want to maintain all my data. So I will go to Pro Photo RGB. If you're just going to a lab, you can go to sRGB. I'm going to recommend you don't though, just for future use and for alternate uses of your images. So I recommend going to Pro Photo RGB. Working spaces for the rest of these does not concern 99.99% of you. You don't care about your CMYK working space unless you're a pre-press guy. And if you're a pre-press guy, you know about this stuff anyway, so don't worry about it. And this, again, this is pre-press stuff. Don't concern yourself. Color management policies. Again, the only one we're going to be concerned about is RGB, and what you want to have is preserve embedded profiles. That needs to stay there. You want to always have preserve embedded profiles on. Again, CMYK and gray, you don't care, just leave them alone. Then you've got some questions down here. Profile mismatches and missing profiles. So ask when opening is kind of annoying. Because if you have your working space, say, set to ProPhoto RGB, and you open up an image that's sRGB or Adobe RGB, it's going to question you every time. And if you're opening up a bunch of images, frankly, it's annoying. I just say don't ask. Just open the file, because since we have preserve embedded profile set, it's going to do that. It's going to leave the file in its state it was in. So if you're working in ProPhoto RGB and you open up an sRGB file, then nothing happens. Just think of it as how many crayons you have in your box. Well, it's giving you ProPhoto RGB is a box. Let's say it holds 1,000 crayons, and you're opening up something in sRGB and it's got 100 crayons. Well, fine, all the crayons still fit. Just leave it alone. Now there are more options. I'll just open this real quick. By the way, if you go on a Nations Photo Labs website, they do have a guide that's specific for them. And some of the things I'm recommending for you are a little different. They're approaching it as you're only using a lab for sending out images. I'm approaching it as your images may go to different places. So keep that in mind. Conversion options, the Adobe, the engine, whatever the default is, leave it alone. The rendering intent. Nations recommends you put the default at perceptual. That's fine. It's not going to hurt anything, because what I'm going to do is go through the process where you're going to decide if you want a perceptual or relative colorimetric rendering intent. And if that's weird language to you, don't worry, it'll be all clear. This advanced control stuff, don't concern yourself again. So really, probably fewer options is best. This is what I recommend as the settings. I would set your working space at ProPhoto RGB. Again, if a lab is all you're doing, then you can go to sRGB. The other thing, again, just to review monitors, much of the monitors out there are still only capable of sRGB. And that includes all of the Apple displays, both the iMacs and the new ones. If a monitor has a bigger color space than an sRGB, believe me, they trumpet it. So if you go into a high-end NEC or one of the ASOS or one of the Samsungs, they will tell you if it's an Adobe RGB display. And that does give you more colors to view. And we're going to see the effect of that when we go into Lightroom. All right, so we've got our settings, and I have my own defaults. Here's my ProPhoto defaults, which have all of these things. And I'll just hit OK. So now where are we? Our monitor has been calibrated. We've got Photoshop set up. Now let's go through the soft proofing process. And what soft proofing allows you to do is see how your print is going to print based on a paper profile before you actually print it. And it's a beautiful thing. Oh, by the way, I'm going to be using Nations Photo Labs profiles. Now, most labs do not provide these to you or make these available. And what a factory profile does, or a lab profile does, is it lets you soft proof to how their printer is going to print before you actually print. In fact, let's do something cool. We're doing this for the same time right now. There's a utility on the Mac that's going to let me see profiles. So what I'm going to do is jump into this utility. Let's just let that fire up. Come on, there we go. And what I'm going to do is bring up sRGB. And here we see the sRGB color space, and that's lovely. Doesn't tell us anything really, other than that's how big it is. But where it comes in handy is when we compare it to something else. So I'm going to hold it for comparison, and I'm going to scroll way down. They're listed here alphabetically. And I'm going to take a look at the Nations Photo Lab Luster profile. And we can see that their paper has a bigger color space in certain colors and a smaller color space in other colors. So it's kind of interesting. So the white thing is sRGB. The color thing is now Nations Luster profile. So what it's telling me is that this paper is capable of printing much deeper, darker colors. You can see pretty much all the way around, blues, greens, red, yellows, and purples. However, it's got a little bit less capability on greens. Now, this isn't really that important to know, because we're going to see the effect of this when we go to our soft proofing, but it's an interesting academic exercise. In fact, to compare it, let's take a look at their profile for metallic paper, and you can see it's got a different response. It's brighter in yellows. It almost goes all the way up to the pinks, but it doesn't have quite the depth. And if you've ever seen metallic prints, you can see by default they're not as dense as a luster print. So by knowing this, we can make adjustments to this in our software before we get there. Mike asks, is there a similar software for Windows? I'm pretty sure there is, but I'm not sure what's current. I haven't really kept up on that. So, yeah, I would probably have to recommend you do a web search for that. This is a utility that's built into the Mac, and I'll have to take a look and see if I can find somebody with a Windows machine to do that. Okay, so what I did was Nations allows you to download their profiles as we did for luster and metallic, and they have an instruction sheet on where to put them. Again, we'll send you the link for their little guide there. But let's go through the soft proofing process. So I've got my image here. I had done my edits. It's all ready to go. This is, by the way, this is the Colorado River just outside of Moab, Utah. Lovely sunset. And I want to see how it's going to print before I actually send it out to the lab. And here's the process. So I go to View, Proof Setup, Custom. And from there, I get my customized proof conditions. Now, I'm set for ProPhoto RGB right now. And if I switch back between my different rendering intents, guess what? Nothing's going to happen because ProPhoto RGB is pretty much the entire visible light spectrum. What we want to see is, all right, if I'm going to have this printed on luster paper, what's going to happen to the image? So I click on the device to simulate, and I scroll all the way down past all my printer profiles. And again, that's the beauty of having them listed alphabetically. Here is the luster profile. Now, do you see what just happened when I did that? I got a little bit of change there. And what I'm going to do is switch back and forth between perceptual and relative colorimetric. By the way, saturation and absolute, stay away from them. The only two that concern you as a photographer are relative and perceptual. These two will just cause you trouble, so stay away. In fact, in Lightroom, when we see that, you'll see they've done away with those. You just have the two choices. Now, Nations does recommend a perceptual as a default. And that's fine. That is a safe way, but I'm going to show you where you might not want to do that. So we've got perceptual. Let's take a look what happens under relative colorimetric. And you can see a change. So one more time. Now the fact that there's a change means there are colors out of gamut, because relative and perceptual deal with colors that are beyond that particular paper's ability to print. So it has to do something with them. And it's going to be different depending on the image. If you have to stick with one, perceptual is a good default. It creates the most pleasing lifelike conversion. However, you might be losing some density in color. As we see here, me personally, I like the effect of relative colorimetric for this image. So that's where we're going to go. Now, while we're here, let's take a look at some of these other boxes. First of all, this simulate paper color, simulate black ink thing. Shouldn't be there. I'm sorry, this has been in Photoshop for years, has several versions, and it just doesn't work well. In fact, if I turn it on, look how dim everything gets. And a luster print has got a lot of pop to it. The problem is the simulation is way too strong. The reality is maybe somewhere towards this simulation, but really the answer is, I'm sorry, it just doesn't work yet. Ignore it. Black point compensation should be on. I've never come across an area where it should not be. So that said, I would like to see Photoshop in its next version get rid of these and hide them under an advanced options. Preserve RGB numbers is another one. Never touch it. It's going to wreak havoc. It's got scientific uses. That's it. It should go away from this menu. So we've taken a look back and forth. We've seen perceptual, lightened up the sky. Yeah, I want the brooding sky, so I'm going to go relative colorimetric. It also maintained this orange glow we've got in the setting sun on top of these buttes here. Now, while we're here, we also have an option to check under View the gamut warning, and this will actually show us which colors are beyond the paper's ability to print. So you see we got this lime green here. And if we look at the view, we can see proof colors is checked, which means we are looking at this image through the paper's profile. This is the effect the paper is going to have on the print with the conversion, the rendering intent that we chose. The gamut warning shows us which colors are out of gamut, meaning these are the colors that are going to move. Now, by the way, excuse me. By the way, if you do this the first time, you're not going to get this green. It's going to be gray, which can be kind of hard to see on top of certain colors. So just so you know, under Preferences in Photoshop, if you go to Transparency and Gamut, you'll see a gamut warning color. And the default is something around here, which can be almost impossible to find, particularly if you have an image that just has a little bit out of gamut. So I prefer this kind of lime green because it's just easy to see. So yeah, that's where you can change it there. All right, so let's turn off the gamut warning. Now, as we looked at our proof colors, let's go back to the Proof Setup Custom. If we look at the difference between our luster profile, let me go way back up to ProPhoto a second. Here's ProPhoto. You can see when I did that, the intensity of this orange came back. The ProPhoto orange was much better than what the paper is capable of printing. Understand there's nothing you can do to make a paper print that bright and orange if it's beyond the paper's gamut. It's just beyond the limit of the paper. So what can you do? All right, well, let's go back to our paper profile again. Sorry, I got so many profiles in here. Okay, so here's our luster paper, and we see that we've lost some intensity here. Again, relative versus perceptual. Pick the one you like. So as I stare at this again, let's see, what do I like better? Yeah, you know what? The more I stare at it, I think I might like the brightness of the perceptual. What do you guys think? Yeah, let's leave it at perceptual. Because what I'm going to do now is I've got my perceptual rendering, and I am continuing to look at this image through the proof colors. So what this allows me to do is to create an adjustment for the image through the profile. And this would just be specifically for that profile. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to change this layer. I'm going to fill it with 50% gray. You think that's handy. What did that do? Well, I'm going to change this. This is called the blending mode. I'm going to change it from normal to overlay. And what the blending mode does is anything I paint on a layer that's 50% gray has no effect on the image below. However, if I paint with white or lighter on top, it will lighten the layer below. If I paint with black, it will darken. So what I liked, again, remember, we're looking at this through the paper profile. I've decided I like what it's doing up here, but I thought it opened up this part of the sky a little too much. It made it a little too bright. So what I'm going to do with this overlay layer is I'm going to get a brush, and I've got black in the foreground, and I'm going to give myself a nice big brush. Oh, by the way, how do you guys adjust your brush size? I'm sure a lot of you are saying they use the bracket key, so I can use the right and left bracket and it makes it bigger and smaller, but the answer is really no. I'm going to show you a better way. On a Mac, hold down Control Option or Control Alt and click, and as you drag left and right, it makes the brush bigger or smaller. In fact, let me make it 100% so you can see it better. Okay, so there it is, bigger or smaller. And if I drag it up and down, it changes the edge hardness of the brush. Very handy shortcut. Once you start doing this, you'll never do the brackety thing again. On a PC, on Windows machines, I believe it's Control right click will accomplish the same thing. So I've got my brush. I'm going to make a nice big one. I want a nice soft edge, and I'm just going to work at 10%. So again, up at opacity, a keyboard shortcut for that to go to 10% is just type in 1 on your keyboard real quick. You see it changes to 10. If you want 40%, just type 4. If you want 100%, you type 0. So let's go back to 10%. And with black, I'm just going to darken up this area here a little bit, just to get a little bit of that density, because I want to maintain the focus on the center of the image. Now, by the way, this overlay method of burning and dodging is pretty handy, but if you've got something that's a great bright highlight, you can't use it because it won't affect something that's really bright. There's another way to do that, which I'll show you in just a second. So where might I want to lighten up? So let's hit X to put white in the foreground. I'll give myself a little bit of a smaller brush, and I'm just going to lighten up the base underneath just a little bit. It'll just kind of subtly draw your eye to that middle. In fact, I'm going to do it there as well. Now, if we turn this overlay layer back to normal, you get to see what I just did. You can see I put a little bit of lighter there, and just darkened this up. So I go back to overlay. It was a very subtle correction, but watch what happens when I turn that layer on and off. Just that. You see how it's reset where you're looking? Your eye is drawn to the light part. It's kind of going up to this left-hand corner. By just doing that little subtle change we did, it had a little bit of brightness there and there. It kind of refocused you into the middle. Great. I've got my image the way I like it. Now I can have my image ready to go out to print. Someone, by the way, Joe Drevis, how the heck are you? I've known Joe for years. Great Photoshop instructor in his own right. Nice to see you there, Joe. By the way, Joe mentions that instead of overlay, if you like, you can also try soft light, which is an interesting point. I had already tested this one, so I knew I liked overlay better. Basically, the difference between these two, and this is a subject for another day, but the contrast curve on what happens is gentler on soft light than overlay. But you can try that, or if it ends up being a little too strong, you can just bring down the opacity. So again, I'm looking at my image through the proof color, so we're seeing it through the paper. Now it's ready to be converted out to the lab. Now we're not going to convert it to the lab's profile. That's a bad thing, because then they're going to end up, it's something called double profiling, which is bad. What we want to do, our goal is to send the lab a file that is an sRGB that has been done on a calibrated monitor. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to Edit, Convert to Profile, and we're going to change it from ProPhoto RGB, not to the paper profile, but to sRGB. Now, you might ask, why would you do that? Because that is how the printer's profile, the printer's software, is designed to convert into its color space. And you saw when I did that, the image overall lightened a little bit because we were looking at it in ProPhoto RGB. So again, I might want to make a little bit of an adjustment here. So let's do that. I'm going to go into just simple brightness and contrast. I'm going to bring the brightness down a little bit, and I'm liking what I see. I like the image here. Great. Now I'm going to save this as a JPEG. Now most labs will take either a TIFF file or a JPEG. I like sending JPEGs just for size and transmission. Since this file has never been a JPEG before, saving it as a high quality JPEG the first time isn't going to hurt it as far as printing goes. Oh, also, by the way, image mode, you can see I'm in 16 bits per channel. If you're going to do it as a TIFF, you're going to want to probably convert it to 8 bits because the lab wants an 8-bit file. And this will be something you should talk to your lab. When you save it as a JPEG, it would do that for you, but it's an extra step that it doesn't hurt to go through. So I've got my file. I've converted it to sRGB. Let's do Save As. And I'm going to save it as a JPEG file. And I'll put it right in my demo file. And I'll call it, let's see, we'll call it Moab, since that's what this was. And you can see it's got the embedded profile. It's already been converted over to sRGB. Save that. I'll save it at the highest quality. And then that file, whenever I send it over, is going to be ready for printing. Sean asked, should you convert to sRGB before making your changes? I would try it both ways, actually. Generally for me, the answer would be yes. I will do that. Oh, and Marjorie asks, why don't you use assign instead of convert? Assign is for a file that does not have a color space assigned to it. And generally, the only time that happens is somebody sends you a screen capture or something. You don't want to assign a file. We need to be able to convert. Someone also asked a good question. Let's see who asked that. Greg asked about how about my histogram combing here. Well, we converted from ProPhoto RGB to sRGB. So yeah, let me go back to the main layer again and bring up the levels. And you can see that it really isn't there. This histogram has not been updated. Once we converted from ProPhoto to sRGB, you do get a clean histogram. So if we look at it, you can see here, we've got a completely clean histogram with no bad holes. And that's what he's mentioning. But good catch. Okay, so this file is ready to go to the lab. That's pretty much an overview. How Photoshop. Now let's go take a look at Lightroom. Oh, and one other thing. Tony asks, if you're printing on an 8-color printer, should you convert to sRGB? And the answer to that is no. 8-color printers have much bigger color spaces than sRGB. I've done some programs on fine art quality printing. You can take a look for those. And Bruce asks, where are these questions being displayed? And unfortunately, Bruce, I'm the only one that gets to see the questions. It has something to do with the administrator function of this presentation software. So sorry about that. I'm the only one that gets to see them. All right, so we're done with Photoshop. The next step is to go into Lightroom. Now, Lightroom does things with color differently. Lightroom basically is two functions. It's an image organization software, and it's a giant, basically Adobe Camera Raw. And the actual conversions don't actually happen until you export that file to somewhere else. So let's jump into Lightroom and see. And for Lightroom, we're going to go a little different. We're going to do a portrait and see what happens. Now, this is Lightroom 5. This is the latest version, and it's added something. So if we click on an image, oops, I got my friend Bethany here. Some of you might have seen her on some of our webinars. Okay. So let me go in the Develop module, and as soon as I go into Develop, you see something here under the image called soft proofing. So here's the image. This is there is no color management again yet. Lightroom by default is working in ProPhoto RGB. It's actually a slight variation of it, but that's too technical. It's working in ProPhoto RGB. The conversion is going to happen on export, but we still get to soft proof to the profile. So to do that now in Lightroom 5, you click on this soft proofing button. And when we click on that, you see up here, create proof copy. We can do that. We'll click on create another copy, and it creates a copy of the image. Now, we've got our histogram here, and you might notice that these things have changed. In fact, if we go back to the original and turn off soft proofing, this is the shadow warning that's showing what you've got, that's solid black, which is fine in this image. And this is showing you any highlights that are clipping, which in this case there are none. When we go to our soft proofing copy we just made, now we've got two new icons here. The first one is showing you what parts of the image are beyond your monitor's capabilities. So if there's colors in this image that are beyond sRGB, it will show you that. And you can kind of see, it's very subtle, it's hard to see here, but as I go over it, if you look at her hair in here, you'll see a slight change. It's very subtle there. Now this one is where are the areas that are going to print. Now, unfortunately, if you have just a very little bit, you might not see a color shift. I'll see, oh, in fact, here's another image we can do. Here's another image, and I'll show you where that's going to show up as soon as this finishes loading. Actually, I happen to know over in the fire, kind of that same bright orange that we ran into before. You see the red just showed up. Now, we are soft proofing, however, to Adobe RGB. So what that was showing you is, in this particular image here, there's even colors that are beyond Adobe RGB. And there's another one, you can see this really bright orange in here. You see how it's turned red? That's showing you those are the colors that are beyond even Adobe RGB. But we're going to worry about converting to sRGB. So let's go get our profile. So again, I didn't show you where the profiles go. It's different on Windows versus Mac, and on Windows, depending on which version you have, it's different. Again, if you go to Nations Photo Lab, we'll send you the link. They have a little guide, a PDF guide that will show you where these things go when you download them. So I click on Profile, and here's our Lustre profile, which I've loaded in. By the way, if you go into Lightroom and you've loaded in the profile, Photoshop automatically sees it. Lightroom, you got to go tell it you want to use it. So you would click on Other, and it will then go to a menu that shows you all of the profiles in your system, and you can just click on the ones that you want to have show. So we had already chosen the NPL, the Nations Photo Lab Lustre, so let's click on that. And now we're soft proofing, and notice now we just have perceptual and relative. So let's take a look at relative, and then we can look at perceptual. And they are subtle, but they are different. And this is, again, it's a choice. This is a flavoring choice that you need to decide. Oh, here's that nasty simulate paper and ink thing. Bad. Just ignore it. I wish they'd stop doing it. So, turn off perceptual, relative. Now, relative does have a tendency to make things look a little bit darker. Perceptual is generally considered a little bit of a smoother, nicer kind of conversion. In this case, I'm not sure which one I like better. I think I'm going to like perceptual better only because relative made this purple area here go a little bit extra purple, and it took away from the subject. However, perceptual also did lighten up this area, I think, a little too much for my liking. I liked it darker. So what I'm going to do is go to perceptual, and then I'm going to just add a graduated fill. Again, this is not meant as a Lightroom demo, but I'm just going to create a graduated fill here, and I'm going to darken that side of the image a little bit. And remember, we're just doing it to this copy because this is just the one that we're going to do our conversion over. I'm going to increase the contrast a little bit and click done. So now I'm looking at it again through the luster profile. I've decided for this image I like perceptual. Again, turn off paper and ink. And now I'm looking at the image, how it is going to print on that paper. And that's the beauty of this. That's the beauty of this whole entire process. Now, now somebody asked, is soft proofing available in Lightroom 3? And the answer is no, unfortunately. Jim also asked, is there a better or preferred for Final Export, Lightroom, or Photoshop? It depends on which versions you're at. If you're at Photoshop 6 or Creative Cloud and Lightroom 5, it's a toss-up because finally both of those programs use the same color engine behind the scene. If you're on an earlier version, they unfortunately use different color engines. That's why if you had Lightroom 4 and Photoshop 5 and you sent images back and forth, you'd often see a color shift. It was a really bad situation. That's a big reason for going up to 6 in Photoshop. When you're sending out for a lab, as far as which is better for the final export, it's a toss-up. It really doesn't matter. If you're going out to your own printer, then it depends on which printer you're using. I do find that if you're using a printer that has an export module rather than using the print module, I find that better from Photoshop. But again, we're dealing with lab stuff today, so for that, it's a toss-up. It doesn't matter. So again, we're looking at our image. This is our proof setting. Again, stay away from simulate paper and ink. We've decided we like luster. I made a slight adjustment to the depth of the image over on this side. So now I'm ready to send this out to my lab. So again, nothing, remember, in Lightroom, it is non-destructive editing. Everything I've done, nothing's happened to the image yet. So this happens when I go to my actual file export. So I'll go to File Export, and I get my export module. First, I need to tell it, well, where do I want it to go? So I'll choose my folder, and I typically, when I'm getting ready for a print job, I have a folder that is, actually it might be on my desktop. Let's take a look here. I have a folder that is for my stuff ready to go out to print. Let me see if it's under my JB. There it is, for lab. So I open that up and I say, okay, that's where I want to send this image. Click on choose, no renaming or anything, and I will send them a full quality JPEG in sRGB. Here's where that conversion takes place. I'm not going to resize to fit. I'm going to send it out at full res. I keep my metadata in the file, no watermarking for a print. That's all I need to do. There's my settings. Again, if you're a person that prefers TIFFs, you can go to other and send it out as a TIFF. But I think you'll find that when you're going out to a lab, it doesn't matter. Since this is the first time it's being saved as a JPEG, it's not hurting anything. Then I click on export, and what it does is it takes this file with this rendering intent, with the adjustment that we made on that dark background to again refocus on our subject. This is what the file looks like. And that's it. If you follow these guidelines, regardless of which lab you do, this is what's going to happen. You're going to get prints that look like you saw on your monitor, and that's the beautiful thing. So let's see. Okay. Here's a good question. Someone asked state that labs work with 300 DPI resolution. The actual answer is labs do not work. Labs don't care what the resolution is. Don't do anything with the resolution. You're just sending them the file in its full resolution, whatever it happens to be. Do not do any re-resing of that file. Don't change it. Now, the default in Lightroom is 240, which is designed for inkjet printers. But it really is, it doesn't even come into play. You're just sending out the file with whatever resolution the file was. That's it. So don't even concern yourself with resolution. You just send them out the best file possible, and they're going to do that. Now, Eduardo asks, now, can I now delete this file from Lightroom? And the answer is, yeah, you could. Understand that it's not a file. That's one of the beauties of Lightroom. What it is it's kind of a simulated file. It's another variation. It's a thumbnail. It's not a copy of the file. If you don't want to see it anymore, you can certainly delete it. It's not going to hurt anything. All it's doing is you're saying, when I go back to my original file, please make these adjustments to the file when you export it. But it's what's called a virtual copy. You didn't really actually copy it. You just created another thumbnail with those settings, which then get applied on export and not until. Now, Philip asked a question, how do you deal with colors that are out of gamut when you identify them in soft proofing? It's a good point. The problem is that when a color is out of gamut, that strictly means it's out of gamut. You can't print it. It's a color that is beyond the printer paper combination's capabilities to print that color. It just can't. It's typically something that's very intense. That's generally where that happens. So what the soft proofing shows you is it's going to show you how much that color is going to change. Can you adjust it? Not really. You can adjust the colors around it so that the relationship might change a little bit, but you can't make a color that's out of gamut print. Just by definition, out of gamut means this is a color that this paper cannot print. So it's just what it's showing you is you might want to adjust images, contrast, saturation on other parts, or color tone so that happens. I have done programs specifically on soft proofing in Lightroom and techniques you can use to minimize that or to adjust for that. Again, way beyond the scope of today's program. Let's see, any other questions before we get back? Let's see. Adam asks, here's another good question. Will sharpening be affected when soft proofing is checked? Can you soft proof and adjust sharpening for that paper type? You can adjust sharpening. Sure, you can make any adjustment that Lightroom is capable of. So to that point, if I go to detail, sharpening is not something I would typically do to a portrait, but just for giggles, let's do it. So let's see, I go into Bethany's eyes here. This is an image I actually downsized for just for speed's sake. This is not the original raw file. In fact, let me back off on that. So if I decided, I want a lot of sharpening, I come way up to 70%. You can see here, as I hide this, you can see I'm getting kind of a nasty little, starting to get a nasty grain on her skin, which I don't want. But maybe I like it around the eyes. Well, typically I would do this at a much lower level if I was going to do it all on a print or on a portrait rather. This is something I do more in a landscape, but I can selectively change that by using the masking slider, and which is kind of worthless as you see it here. What you do is hold down the Alt or Option key, then click on here, and it turns the entire image white. I can then drag it over it, and it starts to create a mask, and it shows you, okay, this is what I will sharpen. Just the stuff that's in white. So maybe I would do something like that to a portrait. Again, I probably wouldn't sharpen a portrait, but that's how I would control it and not have that grain showing up. So again, we're getting a little too deep into Lightroom. Let's kind of steer back. Now, Harry asked, okay, just to clear this up, he said, why to export to the lab with sRGB instead of a TIFF? They're two different things. sRGB is the color space. TIFF is the file type. It might have just been a typo. You might have been asking JPEG instead of TIFF. JPEGs, they're being smaller files, they transmit better. And if you are sending a whole bunch of files up to a lab, which is typically what I do, it just takes time. It takes less time, and it has a cleaner transmission. So there's nothing wrong with sending them a TIFF. They will print just fine. But there's no sacrifice. There's no image quality loss in a JPEG that is being created the first time from a raw file. So no worries there. Okay, and Jen, someone else mentioned that a lot of lab machines don't recognize TIFF files. Depends on the lab and the software. Talk to your lab. But JPEGs are universally accepted. And if you do it this way, really, it's not going to be a worry. Everything is going to work just fine. I'm just about running out of time, so we got to finish up. Let's finish up a little bit of business here. So let's summarize first what we've covered today. First step, if you got nothing out of today, other than calibrate and profile your monitor, I'm happy. You've got to do this. If you're doing your own editing, you got to profile and calibrate your monitor. Because other than some of the really high-end displays, no monitors come calibrated out of the box. They're typically too bright. They're often too blue. And that's because it makes movies and the internet and games look great. It's lousy for photography. In fact, the first time you actually calibrate and profile your monitor, it might look a little dimmer and yellower to you. Something your eyes will adjust to almost immediately. But understand that when you do that, what you're actually seeing is the real data in the file. The monitor is not influencing the color as it is on an uncalibrated system. So, soft-proof the labs. One of two ways. If your lab, like Nations, offers you an ICC profile, then soft-proof to their profile. If you don't have their profile available, it's actually not a big deal. It's not going to hurt you. Soft-proof to sRGB. Same thing. Because the sRGB is the file you're actually going to be sending them. After you've made your adjustments, then convert the file. Do not assign. Convert the file to sRGB in Photoshop. In Lightroom, export to sRGB. The reason you don't convert to the lab profile is because the lab software is expecting an sRGB file. They're going to then convert it into their color space, which is their profile. They know how to do this. Every lab that I deal with knows how to do it. If I'm having a print on paper or metal or canvas or books done, whatever lab I use, as if you go through this process, then that beautiful result is you get back prints that match your monitor, and it will happen consistently. The only time I've had this not happen is if a lab says, oh, we did you a favor and we upgraded you to our premium service, and we decided to make adjustments for you. No, don't do that. Just print my files the way I sent them to you, because if you do it this way, you're going to consistently get great prints back from your labs. That's why. So again, thanks to Nations and thanks to X-Rite. Thank you guys for the great questions. I see a bunch of friends joined us today. Thank you for that. Good to see you guys all again online. Hope to see you in person. So until next time, everybody be well. Hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye.